The wedding ceremony took place in the Crystal Hall of the palace, a building so beautiful that visitors from across the galaxy traveled for months just to see it. Thousands of guests filled the chamber, their formal robes shimmering under lights that floated without any visible support. Representatives from 12 star systems had come to witness this historic union between the Empire and the human race. Princess stood at the altar and tried not to show her disappointment. Her husband-to-be was walking toward her now, dressed in a simple black uniform that looked plain compared to the elaborate clothing of the nobles. His name was Daniel Shaw, a captain in the Earth Alliance, and now a diplomatic liaison assigned to seal this political marriage. He was shorter than males by at least a head. His skin was an ordinary brown instead of the pale blue that marked her people. His eyes were dark and unremarkable, lacking the silver glow that considered the mark of true beauty. He had no telepathic abilities, no enhanced senses, nothing that would make him special in any way. Had been raised to believe that humans were primitive newcomers to the galactic stage. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 300 years ago, while they had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. This marriage was purely political, a way to secure trade agreements and military cooperation. Her father, Emperor, had made that very clear. Daniel reached the altar and smiled at her. It was a warm smile, genuine and kind, did not return it. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient tradition. They exchanged vows in her language, which Daniel spoke perfectly despite his human tongue. They drank from the cup of unity, a ritual that bound their fates together in the eyes of law. When the priest declared them married, the crowd applauded politely, though could sense their true feelings through the telepathic bonds that connected all. Pity, amusement, contempt. They her for being married to a human. They found it amusing that the princess of the greatest empire in the galaxy had been paired with such an inferior creature. And they felt contempt for Daniel himself, standing there with his simple smile as if he did not know how everyone in the room looked down on him. The reception that followed was held in the grand ballroom. Sat at the high table beside her new husband, watching as nobles from across the empire came to offer their congratulations. Most of them barely acknowledged Daniel at all. They spoke to her in rapid, making jokes about humans that they assumed he could not understand. But Daniel understood, knew this because she had heard him speak her language fluently during the ceremony, yet he said nothing. He simply smiled and nodded and continued eating the strange human food that the kitchen had prepared specially for him. Lord, one of her father's most trusted advisors, stopped by their table and leaned close to. He spoke in, not bothering to lower his voice. I see you have trained your pet well, princess. He sits quietly and does not make a mess. Perhaps humans can be domesticated after all. Felt a flash of embarrassment, not for herself but for Daniel. She glanced at her husband, expecting to see anger or hurt on his face. Instead, she found that same calm smile. He looked at Lord and nodded politely, as if the man had just paid him a compliment. Thank you for attending our wedding, my lord, Daniel said in perfect. Your presence honors us. Lord's blue face flushed purple with surprise. He had not expected the human to understand, let alone respond with such grace. He muttered something about needing more wine and hurried away. Studied her husband with new eyes. You understood everything he said. Yes. And yet you did not respond to his insult. Daniel picked up his glass and took a small sip. What would be gained by responding? He wanted to provoke me. If I had shown anger, it would have proven his belief that humans are primitive and emotional. By staying calm, I hymned that satisfaction. It was a reasonable answer, but found herself troubled by it. In culture, such an insult would demand a response. To ignore it was to accept it as truth. She wondered if Daniel truly did not care, or if he was simply too weak to defend himself. The evening continued with more of the same. Noble after noble approached their table, and many of them made comments about humans that ranged from dismissive to openly cruel. Daniel responded to all of them with the same quiet politeness. He never raised his voice. He never showed anger. He never did anything that could be considered aggressive or threatening. By the end of the night, the court had a new name for him. They called him the pet human, a creature that looked vaguely intelligent but lacked the spirit to be truly dangerous. His handmaiden lady helped her prepare for bed while Daniel waited in the outer chamber. Was the closest thing had to a true friend, and she spoke freely. "Your husband seems very gentle, my lady." "Gentle is one word for it," replied. "Weak is another. Perhaps he is simply wise. The humans have a saying about still waters running deep." Dismissed this with a wave of her hand. She had hoped that her political marriage might at least bring her a husband worthy of respect. Instead, she had been given a man who smiled at insults and accepted contempt without protest. When she finally entered the bedchamber, she found Daniel standing by the window, looking out at the 3 moons that hung in the sky. He turned when she entered and smiled that same gentle smile. "The moons are beautiful," he said. "On Earth, we only have one. I used to watch it rise over the ocean when I was a boy." Did not respond. She walked to her side of the bed and lay down, turning her back to him. "Good night," Daniel said softly. She closed her eyes and made a decision. This marriage was a political arrangement, nothing more. She would fulfill her duties to the empire, but she would not pretend to care for a husband who could not even defend his own honor. She would ignore him, and eventually everyone would forget that the princess had ever been married to a human at all. In the darkness, Daniel continued to watch the moons. His smile had faded now that no one could see his face. His eyes, which had seemed so soft and warm all evening, held something else entirely. Something that moved beneath the surface like a predator waiting in deep water. But did not see this. She was already planning her life without him, never knowing that she had just married the most dangerous man in the galaxy. 3 months passed, and settled into a comfortable routine of ignoring her husband. Daniel had been given chambers connected to hers, but they rarely spoke except when duty required them to appear together at official functions. He seemed content with this arrangement, spending his days walking through the palace gardens, reading books in the royal library, and observing the daily life of the court. The nobles continued to mock him. Commander, the head of the palace guard, was particularly cruel. He was a tall warrior with battle scars across his blue face, and he took every opportunity to remind everyone that humans were inferior fighters. "On my world, we train children to fight before they can walk," announced loudly one afternoon in the courtyard. He was speaking to a group of young officers, but his eyes were on Daniel, who sat nearby reading a book. "Humans do not even have claws or fangs. They are prey animals pretending to be predators." Daniel turned a page in his book and did not look up. Prince, cousin, was another constant source of torment. Had always believed that he should inherit the throne instead of, and he resented the alliance with Earth that had strengthened her position. He made a habit of walking past Daniel and muttering insults just loud enough to be heard. "The pet human is reading again. Perhaps someone should teach it a trick. Fetch human, roll over." Daniel would simply nod politely and continue with whatever he was doing. The court began calling him the Shadow because he moved through the palace so quietly and attracted so little attention. Some said he was slow in the mind. Others said humans were naturally submissive. Everyone agreed that the princess had been given a worthless husband. But notice things. She noticed that Daniel learned the names of every servant in the palace within the first month. He knew the cook's daughter was sick and asked about her health each morning. He knew that the old gardener's hands hurt from years of work and brought him a special cream from the human medical supplies. She noticed that he spoke not only but also 4 other galactic languages, switching between them easily when diplomats visited. He understood references to historical events that most had forgotten. He could discuss art, philosophy, and science with scholars who had studied for centuries. She noticed that when Ambassador X of the Dominion visited the palace, something changed. X was a reptilian creature with cold eyes and a reputation for manipulation. During a formal banquet, he made a comment about the emperor's recent military losses that was technically polite but deeply insulting in its implications. The room went silent. Emperor's face darkened with rage, could feel the tension building through her telepathic senses. War had started over smaller insults than this. Then Daniel spoke. Ambassador, I believe there may be a translation error. In my studies of diplomatic language, that phrase carries a different meaning than what you may have intended. Surely you meant to express sympathy for the difficult decisions all leaders must make in times of conflict. He said it so smoothly, so naturally, that it gave X a way to retreat without losing face. The ambassador's cold eyes flickered with surprise, and then he nodded slowly. Yes, a translation error. The human is correct. The tension dissolved. The banquet continued. Later that night, overheard her father speaking with his advisors. The human prevented a diplomatic incident that could have led to war. Perhaps he is not entirely useless. It was faint praise, but it was more than Daniel had ever received before. Found herself looking at her husband with new curiosity. One night she could not sleep. She walked through the palace corridors, enjoying the quiet of the late hours. Her path took her past a small private courtyard that was rarely used. She heard sounds coming from within and stopped at the doorway to look. Daniel was there, alone in the moonlight. He was not reading or walking or doing any of the quiet activities she had come to associate with him. He was fighting. Not fighting an opponent, fighting shadows, but his movements were unlike anything had ever seen. He flowed from one position to another with deadly grace, his hands and feet striking invisible enemies with perfect precision. His body twisted and spun in ways that should have been impossible for a human. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, just pure lethal efficiency. Had watched Commander train the palace guard. She had seen the finest warriors practice their ancient combat arts. None of them moved like this. Daniel fought like death itself had taken human form. Then he stopped. His head turned toward the doorway and their eyes met. Felt a chill run through her. For one brief moment, she saw something in his gaze that made her want to run. It was not anger or aggression. It was simply the look of a predator that had noticed prey watching from the bushes. Then Daniel smiled, and he was her quiet husband again. He bowed his head politely and walked past her, returning to his chambers without a word. Stood in the doorway for a long time, her heart beating fast. She thought about all the insults he had ignored, all the mockery he had endured without response. She had believed it was weakness. Now she wondered if it was something else entirely. What kind of man could fight like that but choose to appear harmless? What kind of strength did it take to hide such skill behind a gentle smile? She returned to her chambers with questions that kept her awake until dawn. When she finally slept, she dreamed of deep water and the shadows of creatures moving beneath the surface. In the morning, Daniel greeted her with his usual warm smile and asked if she had slept well. Looked into his dark eyes and saw nothing but kindness. But she knew now that kindness was only what he allowed her to see. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, something else was waiting, and she was no longer certain whether she should be relieved or terrified. The Festival of Stars was the most important celebration in the calendar. For 1 week, the palace opened its doors to visitors from across the galaxy. Diplomats, merchants, scholars, and nobles arrived by the thousands, filling the capital city with colors and languages from 100 different worlds. Security was stretched thin. Commander had stationed guards at every entrance, but there were simply too many people to watch. The palace buzzed with activity from dawn until late into the night. Among the visitors was a delegation from Earth. Watched them arrive from her balcony, curious to see more of her husband's people. They were a mixed group of men and women in military uniforms, led by a tall woman with sharp eyes and gray hair. Her name was Lady Serene, though learned she was not actually nobility. Humans used the title differently, as a mark of respect rather than birth. Lady Serene was an ambassador, but she moved like a soldier. The other humans in her delegation treated her with obvious deference. What interested more was how they treated Daniel. When the human delegation was formally introduced to the court, Lady Serene spotted Daniel standing quietly in the corner. Something changed in her face. She crossed the room and stood before him, and then she did something that made the entire court go silent. She saluted him. It was a military salute, crisp and formal. The other human officers followed her lead, standing at attention as if Daniel were their commanding general instead of a diplomatic liaison married to an alien princess. "Captain Shaw," Lady Serene said, "it is an honor to see you again." Daniel returned the salute with the same precision. "Ambassador, I hope the journey was comfortable." It was long, but worth it. Her eyes swept over the watching with barely hidden amusement. "I see you have made yourself at home." "I try to adapt to local customs." That night found an opportunity to speak with Lady Serene alone. The ambassador was standing on one of the observation decks, watching the festival lights dance across the city below. "You served with my husband," said. "It was not a question." Lady Serene turned and studied her with those sharp eyes. "I did, many years ago." "The court believes he is weak. They call him the pet human." "Do they?" Lady Serene's voice was soft, but there was something dangerous in it. "That is interesting. What can you tell me about him? His military records are sealed." "Sealed at the highest level, yes. There is a reason for that." Lady Serene was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Your husband was given a name during the Titan campaign. They called him the Ghost of Titan. I would tell you why, but the details are classified. What I can tell you is this. I have served with the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. Men and women who could kill with their bare hands, who walked through fire and came out the other side. Every single one of them was afraid of Daniel Shaw. Felt a chill despite the warm night air. Afraid of him. Not afraid he would hurt them. Afraid of what he became when people he cared about were threatened. I saw him fight once, just once, when our unit was ambushed. Afterward, I had nightmares for months." Lady Serene looked directly into his eyes. "Your husband is not weak, Princess. He is simply choosing not to show his strength. I would not want to be the person who forces him to stop choosing." Before could ask more questions, Lady Serene excused herself and returned to the festival. Stood alone on the observation deck, her mind racing with this new information. The next day, she began her own investigation. She used her authority as princess to access diplomatic communications, military reports, anything that might tell her about the Titan campaign or Daniel's role in it. She found almost nothing. The records had been erased or classified beyond her clearance level. But she found fragments. References to a human special operations unit that had operated behind enemy lines during a war with a species called the. Reports of impossible missions completed against overwhelming odds. And always, whispered mentions of a ghost who moved through enemy territory like smoke and left nothing alive in his wake. On the third day of the festival, everything changed. Was walking through the lower gardens with Lady when three figures emerged from the shadows. They wore the uniforms of palace servants, but their movements were wrong, too precise, too coordinated. Assassins. Reached for the ceremonial blade at her waist, but she knew it was useless. She was trained in politics, not combat, screamed and stumbled backward. The assassins raised their weapons and saw death approaching. Then Daniel was there. She did not see him arrive. One moment the path was empty, and the next he stood between her and the assassins. His face was calm, almost peaceful, but his eyes were the eyes she had seen that night in the courtyard. Cold, focused, absolutely lethal. The first assassin lunged. Daniel moved like water flowing around a stone. His hand caught the attacker's wrist, twisted, and the weapon fell. A precise strike to the throat, and the assassin collapsed. The second attacker fired an energy weapon. Daniel was already moving, his body twisting at an impossible angle. The shot missed by inches. He closed the distance in 2 steps and struck 3 times in rapid succession. The assassin fell without making a sound. The third tried to run. Daniel caught him before he took 5 steps. There was a brief struggle and then silence. The entire fight had lasted perhaps 6 seconds. Daniel turned back too. There was blood on his hands and a long cut across his arm where one of the attackers had grazed him with a blade. He ignored it completely. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Could not speak. She could only shake her head. "Good." He looked at the fallen assassins with an expression that held no satisfaction, only cold assessment. These were professionals. Someone inside the palace sent them. He touched his wounded arm as if noticing it for the first time. "We should return to the main hall. It is safer there." "Your arm," managed to say. "It is nothing. I will treat it later. First, I need to ensure you are protected." He offered her his hand, the same hand that had just killed 3 trained assassins without hesitation. Took it, and his grip was gentle despite the blood. As they walked back toward the palace, thought about what Lady Serene had said. Her husband was not weak. He simply chose not to show his strength, but someone had just forced him to show it. And was beginning to understand that whoever had sent those assassins had made a terrible mistake. The coup began at midnight. Was awakened by the sound of explosions in the distance. She sat up in bed and reached for Daniel, but his side was empty. The sheets were cold. He had been gone for some time. Before she could move, Lady burst through the door. Her face was pale with terror. "My lady, the palace is under attack. Prince soldiers have taken the outer gates. They are moving through the corridors. The emperor has been captured." Felt ice spread through her chest. "Where is my husband?" "I do not know. No one has seen him." They barricaded the door and waited in darkness. Through the walls, could hear shouting, weapons fire and screams. The coup had been well planned. Must have been gathering his forces for months, waiting for the festival when security was weakest, and there were too many strangers in the palace to notice a few hundred more. An hour passed, then 2. The sounds of fighting grew closer, then moved away. Held's hand and tried not to think about what was happening outside. Then the palace communication system crackled to life, and its voice filled every room. "Citizens of the Empire, the old regime has fallen. Emperor has been removed from power for his weakness and his shameful alliance with the inferior human race. I, Prince, am now your emperor. Any who resist will be executed. And as a demonstration of our new policy toward humans, the creature known as Daniel Shaw will be publicly killed at dawn. The age of purity begins now." Gasped, felt something strange building in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as fear, not fear for herself but fear for Daniel. She realized, with sudden clarity, that she did not want him to die. Somewhere in the past months, the quiet human had stopped being a stranger and become something else. She was not sure what exactly, but the thought of losing him hurt in ways she had not expected. Another hour passed. The palace grew quiet, too quiet. Then the lights went out. Not just in their chambers, everywhere. Through the window, could see that the entire palace had gone dark. Emergency lights flickered briefly and then died. The only illumination came from the 3 moons hanging in the sky. Somewhere in the distance, someone screamed. His voice came over the communication system again, but this time he sounded uncertain. "What is happening? Why are the lights out? Guards, report." No one responded. Another scream closer this time. Then weapons fire, brief and frantic, followed by silence. Pressed her ear against the door and listened. She could hear footsteps running past, multiple soldiers moving quickly. Their voices were tense with fear. "He is here somewhere, find him." "Where did go? He was right behind me." "Check the eastern corridor. Move in pairs. Do not let him separate us." More weapons fire, more screams, the sounds of bodies falling. The communication system crackled again, but this time it was a different voice. A calm voice, a human voice. "Prince, this is Daniel Shaw. I am coming for you." The message repeated 3 times, and then the system went silent. Heard soldiers running past her door, but they were not hunting anymore. They were fleeing. Their footsteps echoed through the dark corridors, accompanied by shouts of terror. "He is not human. No human can move like that." "Fall back, everyone fall back to the throne room." Through it all heard no sound from Daniel. He moved through the palace like a ghost, striking from shadows, disappearing before anyone could react. The soldiers had numbers and weapons and training. None of it mattered. An hour before dawn, the door to his chambers opened. She grabbed the ceremonial blade and prepared to fight, but the figure in the doorway was familiar. Daniel stood before her, barely visible in the moonlight. His simple clothes were torn and stained dark with blood. Most of it was not his own. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something that made take a step backward. "It is over," he said. "Forces have surrendered. Your father is safe." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "What did you do? What was necessary?" He led her through the palace corridors. Everywhere she looked, she saw the aftermath of his passage. Soldiers lay unconscious or dead. Weapons were scattered across the floor. Blast marks the walls where desperate shots had missed their target. They reached the throne room. Knelt on the floor, his hands bound behind his back. Commander and general knelt beside him, along with a dozen other traitors. Around them stood the survivors of the palace guard, who had once Daniel freed them from their cells. Emperor sat on his throne, looking older than had ever seen him. His eyes were fixed on Daniel with an expression she could not read. Daniel walked past the prisoners without looking at them. He stopped before and stood there in silence. The prince who had mocked him for months, who had called him a pet and a shadow, could not meet his eyes. "You sent assassins after my wife," Daniel said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried through the silent throne room like thunder. "You threatened her life to hurt me. You thought I was weak because I did not respond to your insults. You thought humans were inferior because we do not have claws or fangs or telepathy." He crouched down so that his face was level with us. "Let me tell you something about humans. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived ice ages and plagues and predators larger than your palace guards. We fought each other for thousands of years, developing weapons and tactics that would give your finest warriors nightmares. And through all of it, we learned one crucial lesson. True strength is not in showing power. True strength is in controlling it." Daniel stood and turned away from the trembling prince. "I controlled my strength for months because it was not needed. I endured your mockery because responding would have served no purpose. But you made one mistake. You touched my wife. And for that, I showed you exactly what a human is capable of when we stop holding back." He walked to and took her hand. In front of the entire court, in front of her father and the defeated traitors and the guards who had once called him the pet human, he raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am glad you are safe," he said softly. "That is all that matters." Looked into his eyes and saw both the warrior and the gentle husband. Both were equally real. Both were equally him. And she understood now that she had never truly known Daniel Shaw at all. She was only just beginning to. In the days that followed the failed coup, the empire changed forever. Prince and his co-conspirators were tried before the High Council. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Ambassador X of the Dominion was exposed as the foreign power behind the plot, having promised military support in exchange for breaking the alliance with Earth. The ambassador was expelled from space, and diplomatic relations with the Dominion were severed entirely. But the true change was in how the court viewed Daniel Shaw. The nobles who had mocked him now looked at him with fear. When he walked through the corridors, conversation stopped. When he entered a room, people moved aside. Commander, who had once called humans prey animals, could not meet Daniel's eyes. The whispers that followed Daniel were no longer about his weakness. They were about the night he had moved through the palace like death itself, dismantling an entire coup with nothing but his bare hands. Emperor summoned Daniel to the throne room for a private audience. Was present, standing beside her father's throne as she had done since childhood. She watched her husband approach and kneel before the emperor. "Rise," said. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and something that might have been humility. "You saved my life. You saved my daughter. You saved my empire. I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid." "I did what any husband would do to protect his wife," Daniel replied simply. "No, you did what no one else could have done." The emperor paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I was wrong about humans. I arranged this marriage because I believed your people were useful tools, nothing more. I see now that I was blind. You have shown me that humans are far more than we imagined." Daniel said nothing. He simply waited. "I am told that you killed 47 soldiers during the night of the coup. 47 trained warriors, many of them enhanced veterans of our military. And you did this alone, without weapons, in complete darkness." The emperor shook his head slowly. "How is this possible?" "Humans are adaptable," Daniel said. "We learn, we improvise, and when we must, we fight with everything we have." That night found Daniel in the private courtyard where she had first seen him practice. He was not fighting this time. He simply stood in the moonlight, looking up at the stars. "Who are you really?" she asked. Daniel turned to face her. In the silver light, his features were soft, almost gentle. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had terrified an army. "I am exactly who I have always been. A soldier who grew tired of war. A man who wanted peace. A husband who loves his wife." The last words made his breath catch. "You love me." "I have loved you since the first day I saw you. You were so beautiful standing at that altar, trying so hard not to show your disappointment." A sad smile crossed his face. "I knew you deserved better than a political marriage to a human you did not choose. I told myself I would be patient. I would be kind. I would give you every reason to see me as something other than a burden. Why did you hide what you are? Why did you let everyone mock you?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, lost in memories. "During the Titan campaign, I did terrible things, necessary things but terrible. I killed so many people that I lost count. I became something that frightened even my own soldiers. When the war ended, I looked at myself and did not recognize what I saw." He met her eyes. "I swore I would never be that person again. I would be gentle. I would be patient. I would control the thing inside me that wanted to destroy everything in its path. But you could not control it forever. No, when they threatened you, all my promises to myself meant nothing. The moment I heard about the assassination attempt, something woke up inside me, something I had kept locked away for years." Daniel's hands closed into fists at his sides. "I did not want you to see that part of me. I was afraid you would look at me and see a monster." Stepped closer. She reached out and took his hands, feeling the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. These were the hands that had killed to protect her. These were the hands that had touched her so gently every day of their marriage. "I do not see a monster," she said. "I see a man who carries a great burden. I see a warrior who chose peace when he could have chosen power. I see my husband." Daniel's eyes searched her face. "You are not afraid of me." "I was. That night in the corridor when I saw you fighting, I was terrified. But then I watched you endure months of insults without responding. I watched you learn the names of servants and help an old gardener with his aching hands. I watched you prevent a war with words when you could have started one with violence. Squeezed his hands. The part of you that fights is not who you are. It is simply what you can do when you must. Who you are is the man who chose not to. For the first time since she had known him, Daniel's calm mask cracked. She saw tears forming in his eyes, quickly blinked away. He whispered, "Humans are strange creatures," she continued. "You appear weak but carry strength that terrifies the galaxy. You smile at insults but unleash fury when those you love are threatened. You are volcanoes pretending to be mountains. And I think perhaps that is the most dangerous thing of all. Not the power itself, but the control you have over it." She released his hands and touched his face, turning it toward her. "I spent months trying to ignore you. I told myself this marriage meant nothing. But I was wrong. Somewhere along the way, you became important to me. And tonight, when I thought might kill you, I realized I could not bear to lose you." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I want to know you. The real you. Not the mask you show the court and not the warrior you keep hidden. I want to know the man beneath both." Daniel looked at her with wonder in his eyes. "That man is complicated. He is broken in places that may never heal. He carries guilt and pain that he will never fully escape." "Then teach me, help me understand. We have a lifetime ahead of us. Let us spend it learning who we truly are." For a long moment, Daniel simply stared at her. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, gentle and tentative and full of promise. When they separated, saw that his eyes were different. The walls he had built were still there, but now there was a door he was willing to open for her. "There is a human expression," he said softly. "Still waters run deep. Your handmaiden quoted it once." "I remember." She was right, but what she did not say is that sometimes those still waters need someone to dive beneath the surface, someone brave enough to see what lies in the depths and not swim away. Daniel took her hand again. "Will you be that person for me?" She smiled, and for the first time she meant it completely. "I already am." They stood together in the moonlight, two people from different worlds finally seeing each other clearly. Behind them, the palace glowed with the lights of recovery. Before them, the future stretched out like an unexplored galaxy. And somewhere in the stars, the ghost of Titan finally found peace.